All right, I was going to start the class by turning on the projector. It's probably a good way to start the class. Give it a second there to fire up. I was going to start the class by looking at the word scaffold. But sometimes it benefits us to know the precise definition of words, but I'm not sure that would be a good idea because when I looked up scaffold, first definition under here was a raised wooden platform used formally for the public execution of criminals. Well, that's not how we're using scaffolding in this case. Probably a better definition for us is here. A temporary or movable platform for workers to stand or sit when working at a height above the floor or ground. So the idea is that a scaffold is not building, right? Scaffolding is a tool. It's a device, a tool, however, a structure, however you want to put it, to help us build stuff. So therefore, don't make the mistake in doing, and again, I'm speaking specifically for your project, don't make a mistake in your project of thinking that scaffolding will do everything for you. All right, that's kind of been the theme last week, and it'll be the theme this week as well. The scaffolding doesn't do everything for you. It shouldn't be doing everything for you. It would be a very, very, very simplistic system if you could achieve everything that you needed to through scaffolding. All right, so therefore, you're going to have to write some code on your own. And we saw an example last time of doing a query that provided us meaningful data. Instead of just scaffolded list, we produced a class roster that we could use to, in the old days, they used to print them out and hand them to the instructors of the course. Now we see them in Canvas or wherever. We see them when we go in our grades, and we see them all over the place. And one of your assignments is for you to produce a menu. What that is that's taking all the data that's in your database and organizing it in a way that could actually be useful for someone. Think of the scaffolded pages that you have. All right. You wouldn't hand that to a customer, all right, and expect them to figure out what they want to order. You would hand them a menu, and a menu is organized a certain way, probably by category, and however you categorize stuff is okay. You could categorize stuff like breakfast, lunch, supper. You could categorize them as appetizers, fish entrees, chicken entrees, pasta entrees, whatever you organize them into categories. But you'd have different meals separated by categories and organized in a way where you could see the meals that are available under each category. The one thing I didn't deduct for this, but I probably should have, is that many of you on the menu didn't show the price of the meal. I guess I'm not rich enough to go to a restaurant and see a menu and order something without seeing what the price is first. I don't know, maybe there's people out there that can do that, but I would think that the price would be indispensable. So think about how people are going to use the application that you're creating. All right, I guess is what I'm asking you to do. So chances are there's ways that you can organize the data and present it that will make it more usable for your hypothetical users. I graded your designs, those of you that turned it in, and I saw a variety of things, and they all look good. And I wrote for everyone. I didn't write it just for certain people, but I wrote for everyone. Be sure you're creating queries that organize the data into meaningful information. So keep that in the front of your mind as you go forward. The other thing that I mentioned is if you feel that you design something that is too big for you to accomplish, I don't want to tell you if you come up with a system that has 8 tables in it, for example, that, gee, that's kind of big. Maybe you want to scale it down. But when you're working on it, if you find that, yeah, it's a little big, I need to scale it down, then just email me and we can talk about how you could scale it down to make it still meaningful, but maybe not quite as much work as you originally planned. Anyhow, we're going to look at another example where the data is organized in a more usable way. All right. And that is with the Contoso database and the select functionality on faculty. So let me run that and show you what it does, and then we'll talk about how it does it. So we run this. Look at instructor. Notice that there's an extra option along with each instructor. Normally we have edit, details, and delete. Here we have a select. And watch what happens when we click select. So we select this instructor. What happens? First of all, they're highlighted. All right. They're highlighted in this color, and it's not just a mouse over thing, you know, as long as until we click select for another professor, they stay highlighted. It then shows a list of the courses taught by the selected instructor. Now I know they show the courses up here too, but they show the courses in a list where you could display more data about the courses if you wanted to. Here in this column, we don't really have much more room than to display the course number and the description. But in this listing here, we could display the number of credit hours maybe, the number of seats that are allocated for the class, and so on. So we could display more information. And then when you select for one of these courses, it gets highlighted, and we show a list of the students that are in the class along with their grade. Now let's refresh our memory about the entities at work here. We have instructors as our starting entity. Instructors have associated with them a list of courses. Each course has associated with it a list of enrollment records, and each enrollment record is tied to a particular student. So from the instructors and a little bit of information from the course, and from the enrollment / student entities. I want you to notice something else. Look at the URL. The URL grows. We first go to this page. When we first go to this page, notice that it just says /instructors. Okay. So that's the URL. I hope you can all see that. It just says /instructors. When we select an instructor, we get a number after it. And what does that number represent? That number represents the ID number of the selected professor. All right. So we've selected the professor or faculty member with an ID of 5. And then we pull all the courses taught by that instructor. In other words, those courses that have an instructor of 5. When we pick a particular course, our URL is changed again We still have 5, indicating that that's the professor selected, and we have on the query string the course ID. So it doesn't look like it, but effectively we're building up the query string. That 5 doesn't really look like is on the query string, but it actually is. So we're building the query string from when we initially load the page, there's nothing on the query string. We select a professor, there's the professor ID on the query string. Finally, when we select a course, there is the professor and the course on the query string. So notice all these things, because we'll come back to them as we look at how the code works. All right, and as always, the code is a combination of what we have in the code behind, or the CS file, and in the CSS_HTML file. So let's look at this example. It's on the index for the instructor. We're going to pick start. We'll pick the instructor and the CSS_HTML. I always think it's better to start with the CSS_HTML first, because that tells us how the data is supplied. This tells us how the data is, specific data is being displayed. So first thing you notice, we have a variable of type instructor data. Okay. Let's see what that contains. It's in the model. Oh, I lied. Oh, school view modes. Instructor index data. In our CS file, we have a variable of type instructor index data that is simply called index data. And that consists of, as we notice, a list of instructors, a list of courses, and a list of enrollments. In other words, we're going to fill in a list of instructors. When we select the instructor, we're going to fill in a list of courses. When we select the courses, the particular course, we're going to fill in a list of enrollments. So this is providing the data for the 3 sections of our page: instructors, courses, enrollments. Instructors, courses, and enrollments. Now, do we have to do it this way? Did we have to define a separate class called instructor index data? And the answer is no, we didn't. This is a model that isn't used to create an entity in a database, unlike other models. This is simply a model that is used to organize the data that's going to appear on the instructor index page. It gives places to put the instructors for the instructor list, place to put the courses for the course list, and a place to put the enrollments for the student list. We also have the instructor ID and the course ID. So look what happens when we on get. In other words, when the page initially loads. Now, what does this mean in here? This means that maybe on the query string, there is an attribute called ID and one called course ID. Remember, that's what we get when we finally have picked a professor. We get the ID. When we pick the course ID, we get the course ID. But those are optional fields. We don't have to have those. Hence the question mark after declaration of in. So our instructor data, we're going to populate not the entire, all three entities in the instructor data, index data. We're going to populate this one to start because this gives us the list of instructors. So we say, give me a list of instructors. Start with the instructors in the database. Include office assignment. Include course. And include department. Or then include department. And order by last name. And we create a list of that. So the first thing we do is we populate this guy. Remember, what does it mean when we say include and then include? It means that we want to fill out those portions of the instructor object. So the instructor object has in it all these fields, but it also has in it a collection of courses and a single office assignment. So by writing this code, we want to fill in that office assignment object. It's an attribute of the instructor, as well as fill in that course list that is an attribute of instructor. And oh yeah, by the way, our course contains enrollment records, so we want those as well. So we want course filled in with the department number, the department information, and all the enrollments. Why is this then include? I'm sorry, we don't have the enrollments yet. My mistake. We've just included for the instructor the office assignment, the courses, and the department information associated with each course. So what do we get when we're done with this statement right here? When we've hit this, what do we have? We have in this object, the instructor index data object, we have the instructor list filled in. And for each instructor, we have their courses filled in, as well as their office assignment. And for each course, we have the department filled in. So we get this populated, this instructor list populated. And it contains the courses and the office assignment. Now, remember, this is the data we need to do that first part of the screen, to do the list of instructors. These other two aren't going to come into play initially. So if this is the initial load of the page, this ID are going to be empty. So we're not going to have an instructor ID, and we're not going to have course ID. All right. So these are going to be empty, and therefore ID is going to be null. So we don't do this the first time through. Course ID is null, so we don't do this. So we could do this in debugger if you want, but if we ran this through debugger, in fact, let's do that. Okay, we're here, creating that object for the index data. We're in this statement. We're now at this statement. And look what happens. We skipped this if statement. We skipped the body of this if statement because the ID is null the first time through. When the page initially loads, that ID is null. Therefore, we don't do this, and we don't do this because the course ID is also null. Debugger is a valuable tool for you to get used to reading. It shows you values of local variables, and you can actually look to see. In this case, it shows me the ID and course ID is null. It shows me that we have our instructor data that contains instructors, enrollments, and courses, and the count of the instructors is 5. And if we can look at each one of them, so don't hesitate to use the debugger if you're running into difficulty, because that really allows you to sort of x-ray into the code and see precisely what's going on, and that information is very useful in debugging. A lot of people, and I've done this too, so I'm not putting myself any different than the people I'm describing. A lot of people debug by staring at the code and hoping that something jumps out at them. Well, that doesn't happen real often, right? It's better to have some systematic way of going about debugging. And using the debugger, putting in the proper breakpoints, and then looking at the value of variables is very useful in figuring out exactly what's going on and can help you debug stuff. Okay. So when we're done, go in, continue. When we're done, we get this. And what is that? That is this object with this filled in. So let's look at the CSS_HTML for this. Not that one, this one. All right, there's our instructor ID. We have our create. We have for each item in model, instructor data, instructors. What does that mean again? It means in the model, which is a CS file, you have a variable called instructor data. We want to pull through the instructors that are contained in that instructor data object. So we want to loop through this list effectively. We're going to ignore this right now. We display for it the last name, first, middle, initial, hire date. If the office assignment is not null, we're displaying the office assignment dot location for that faculty member. Remember what we're looping through. We're looping through items in the instructor list inside instructor data. So item represents an individual instructor, and we're looping through them from that list. And for that instructor, we're displaying the course data. So we end up with what we've seen before. All right. Let's see what happens next when we click select. All right. Are there any questions over that part? Okay, let's see what happens next? Now, let's say we click the select button. Notice each of these, and we've seen these before, we just maybe didn't pay as close attention to them. Whether you're talking about the edit, the details, or the delete, you have to know specifically what instructor that you are going to edit or display the details for or delete. So you have to pass the key of the instructor, in other words, the instructor ID. So this route ID is going to come across effectively on the query string as an ID, and it gets populated by the item ID. In other words, the primary key of that instructor table. And this is select. What does select do? It calls index, which is this page, calls back this page, except the different thing is it passes the ID of the instructor on the query string. And the rest of it we can ignore because courses is null. And enrollments is null. Remember, we didn't populate those. We just populated the instructors. So we click select. Here's our list of instructors with the courses and office assignment filled in. We click select. We call back this page and give it the ID number of the instructor we selected. So what happens then? Well, some of the same stuff happens. Some new stuff happens. We're going to create our instructor data object again. Remember, that instructor data object doesn't stick around from time to time when you rerun it. We have to reinitialize that instructor data variable each time. So we're going to retrieve again the list of instructors. And we're going to fill in the office assignment. We're going to fill in the courses. And then we're going to include the department associated with each course. We order by last name and we create our list. Now, is ID not equal to null? Yes. ID has a value this time through. It has a value of 5, which is Kim's instructor ID number. So we set that variable, ID, and we say, find the instructor in instructor data that matches that ID. We don't have to, notice this doesn't start with context instructors. We don't have to retrieve the list of instructors from the database. We already have that data, and it's in this list right here. So we can pull from that list a specific instructor whose ID matches the value of the ID on the query string. And there's only going to be one of them, right? Because it's the primary key, so we're pulling single. So when we're done, in this instructor object, we're going to have the instructor that was selected out of this list. And we populate this instructor variable with the proper instructor from that list that matches the ID. And we simply take those instructors' courses and use that to fill in this variable. So if there's an ID, that means we've clicked select on the instructor. We find the instructor in this list, take their courses. Remember, we fill in those courses when we initially loaded that instructor list, we take their courses and assign it to instructor data courses. So we set the instructor data courses. So now when there's an ID on there, these two things are filled in. So we look at the CSS_HTML. What does that do? Well, does everything it did before except item ID equals the instructor ID in the model. Notice we save that ID in the instructor ID. So if when we're looping through the instructors, we are looking at a particular instructor that was selected, we select this variable called select row to table success. Now, we set selected row to space. Only when we find the selected instructor in this loop that we're going through do we set that to table success. And table success is used as the class of this TR. In other words, if I look through this, I'm going to find in there is it hiding? Is table success a bootstrap class? I'm guessing that it is. There it is, table success. That's a class associated with a table row. We've successfully found it, successfully found that instructor in the list of instructors. Therefore, we set the status, we set the selected row variable to table success, which means that the selected instructor gets that style. So it gets a different coloration. So we display that. This is the same as before till we get down to here. Now we filled in this list of instructors, or I'm sorry, this list of courses. So therefore, what are we going to do? We're going to loop through that list of instructors. And we're going to do the same thing. If we happen to select that course ID, we're going to color that row differently. We haven't gotten to the point of selecting courses yet. We've just selected an instructor. And then we go and we display the information from the course, including from the department name. How can I do that? Because when I initially retrieved the data, I retrieved instructors, filled in their courses, and for each course filled in the ID field. Now you can see, you might be able to see what's coming next. we have a link to select the course. And we're going to put on the query string ASP route course ID item.course ID. That's why the second time through, or each subsequent time through, when we select a course, now we have an ID, which is the ID of the selected professor. And we have a course ID, which is the ID of the selected instructor, and both of those colored. We do the exact same thing as we did before in the code behind. Whereas if course ID is not equal to null, we go and we find the course in the course listing. That course we load, we populate the students or the enrollment records, and then for each enrollment record, we populate the student record. Now, this is a little different than we've done before. And I want you to think why we do it this way. All right? The typical instructor at a college might teach 4 courses or so. Some of those courses may contain literally hundreds of students. All right? Some of those at big universities, sometimes they have those big old lecture halls where, you know, especially if it's like a course for freshmen or an introductory course, you might have 100-ish students in there. Because of that, we don't want to pull for each course the enrollment data. That's why it wasn't pulled up here. We could have pulled for each course the enrollment data, and for each enrollment data, then include the student, but we didn't, because there could just be too much volume of that data in there. So what this is telling it to do is, once we found the course that we want, populate the enrollments for that course. So the enrollment in the course, this enrollment list in the course, gets populated. And then for each row in the enrollments list, we're going to load up the student information. And then we set instructor data enrollments to equal the selected course enrollments. So this finally gets populated. And essentially, we do the same thing again in the CISS HTML. We load the instructor data, we load the selected course data, and then finally, we load the enrollments and pull the enrollments and the student information. Now, what do you have to do? Your job is 50% as big as this job, right? Because this example, you start out with a list and allow users to drill down one level further, and then a second level further. You're only going to allow your users to drill down one level further. In other words, you're going to display a list of categories, which you probably already have. That was probably scaffolded for you. But you're going to take that and modify it to add a select. And then when they select it, display all the meals for that selected category. And display everything about the meal, including the note. So you'll do what they do, but you won't do it as much. You will do it only one level deep instead of 2 levels deep. All right, here's a preview of the next few weeks, because this is week 12. That means we have 3 more weeks of classes. All right, it's amazing, right? I mean, this semester flies by, and for me, as soon as we hit the 8th week of the semester. It just goes like that. All right. Next week, I'm going to cover a topic called, God, what's it called? Design patterns. And we're going to talk about model view controller, which is a different way to create pages than we have done. All right, don't be alarmed. It's not going to be that tough. It's going to be similar to what we've done, but just a little bit different. And we'll compare a little bit about the respective advantages and disadvantages of the way we've done it versus this other way. I think it's important that you're at least exposed to the model view controller approach. So we'll first of all talk about what design patterns are. Then we'll talk about specifically what design patterns we use in this course. There's a name for it, the model view view model. So MVVM. And we'll talk about how that's different from MVC, model view controller. And then you'll go through a tutorial. Essentially, you will go through the model view controller version of the movie tutorial that we did early on in the class. So you don't have to really write any code. You just have to follow directions for that. I just want you to see everything that goes into play for doing that. So that's what we'll talk about next week. All right. That's week 13. Week 14 and 15 are time for you to work on your projects. So there will be no lectures on week 14 and 15. You will have an extra hour to ask questions and to work on your stuff and to catch up on any assignments that you haven't had turned in and to work on your project. I really want to see you do great on the project. I really want to see you take the basic data that you enter and do some great things with it and present it in a way that would be very useful for your users to use. If there's a chance that you run into something that you need to do something that we haven't talked about in class, you can use that time to ask me questions about it. And we could run through and maybe I can give you assistance in getting stuff done. And I urge you to do stuff beyond the bare minimum for the project. So it's important enough for me to give you 2 weeks of class time to work on that. So that'll be work weeks 14 and 15. And then the project is due during finals week, and then we're done and ready for Christmas break. All right. Are there any questions about anything? So one more lecture next Tuesday. You only have a total of 12 assignments. There are no assignments due. There's an assignment due next week, but the only assignment after that due is the final project. Let me make sure I'm not lying to you. So I think that was already posted. I think today I went in and changed week 11 and 12 to 11, 12, and 13 in Canvas. Yeah, this was formerly weeks 11 through 12. I made it 11 and 13. So your last assignment is this one, which is to do the model view controller tutorial. And then I haven't posted it the rest of the semester, but there are no other projects due the rest of the semester. All right, if there are no more questions, oh, yeah. Thank you, Tricia. Yeah, this semester has flown by. They go faster each time for me. I don't know if that's your experience or not. But yeah, if you have any other questions, please let me know. we will either see you in lab or we will see you next week.